Right, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending today's meeting. Just a brief statement on the protocols to be followed during this remote meeting. Please note this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and the recording will be made available for public viewing following the meeting. Can members please mute their microphones throughout the meeting when not speaking? This is important since it helps to ensure the quality of the audio for all present. Your microphone should be switched on when invited to speak and switched off when you have finished speaking. Please use the raise hand button to indicate that you wish to speak at any point. I can also ask that officers introduce themselves by confirming their names and role before speaking for the first time on any item. If any member loses connection or have any technical issues during the meeting, please alert the clerk as soon as possible, either using the chat function within the meeting or by email phone. I will now ask the clerk to carry out a roll call of the elected members participating in today's meeting. Sheila?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Scott Farmer?
Present.
Councillor Margaret Brisley?
Present.
Councillor Chris Kane?
Present.
Councillor Alistair Tolamash?
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Jane Hutchison? No, not here. Councillor Jeremy MacDonald?
Present.
Oh. And Councillor Ross Oxburgh? Not present. We have 5 members present, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Apologies and substitutions. I've got apologies from Alan Gibson, who will be substituted by Superintendent Mandy Patterson. And just some news to make the committee aware. Chief Inspector Jill Marshall will be moving on to pastures new within Police Scotland. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank Jill for all her diligent and hard work in work with the committee and in the community planning partnership. And we have, as an observer here, we have the Chief Inspector Caroline Logan, who will be taking over as Area Commander at the end of March. So welcome, Caroline. Jill, you'll be a great loss to us, but obviously as an asset to Police Scotland, you'll be obviously moving on to pastures new. So on behalf of the committee, I want to wish you well in your new endeavours, and I look forward to working with Caroline to ensure that we continue to build on our relationships and ensuring that our communities are protected, and that we build that collegiate relationship as we go forward. I'll now pass on to Mark Bryce, because there's also being changes at Scottish Fire and Rescue. So Mark, if you want to update us on that.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Bryce, Area Commander for the Scottish Fire and Rescue speaking. Chair, I'd like to introduce the group to the new Head of Service Delivery for the East of Scotland, Deputy Assistant Chief Officer Stuart Nicholson, who's joined the service from South Yorkshire. The DACO has asked if he can come along and observe these meetings across the East of Scotland, so I'd like to welcome the DACO. I'd also like to inform the meeting that Group Commander Alistair Jupp, who's been presenting at the scrutiny meetings for a couple of years now, will be moving on, or has moved on, to a new role within my team within Stirling Fife, but will no longer be coming into this meeting. And unfortunately, I know that my new Group Commander Paul Cunningham is having IT issues this morning, so I'm afraid can't join us, but he'll be introduced at the next meeting, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for that, and again, many thanks to Alistair Jupp for his contributions over the years to this committee and in the community planning partnership, and to welcome Stuart Nicholson to the meeting here today. We look forward to building up relations with Stuart and moving forward with the public safety agenda. So thank you for that. Are there any declarations of interest? No. urgent business. I did have two items of urgent business that had been raised by Councillor MacDonald and one from Councillor Tollemache. That was due to the recent march by anti-vaxxers last Saturday in Stirling. What I propose to do is that we'll get a verbal update from CI Jill Marshall during the police report. Another item from Councillor MacDonald they wished to bring forward, which was to do with Storm Arwen. I do not regard that as urgent business, Councillor MacDonald. I have communicated to you through the clerk that decision. There would not have been sufficient time to have produced a report on that, and there is ongoing. It's an iterative process in terms of reviewing our resilience plans, and I'm sure they will come forward to the relevant committee. I would presume it'd go to Environment and Housing first, in the first instance, and then would be proceed on to, for noting purposes, to the Public Safety Committee. But I'm sure you'll understand that it's not shutting down debate in any way. It's just a matter of the timing of the request.
Chair, sorry, Chair, to interrupt. Just before we move on, I just wanted to announce I've joined the meeting now, and apologies for being a few minutes late.
Right, thanks, Councillor Oxford.
As have I, and apologies from me too.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 4 now, which is the minutes of the 28th of October, pages 1 to 2. Can I take those as an accurate record? Agreed. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 5, which is the rolling action log, pages 3 to 4. And I see the PU 200 that an update was emailed to members with regard to the issue of speeding measures in Bridge of Allen, and if we can now accept that that is removed from the rolling action log, then that will complete all actions in terms of this term of the committee before the local government elections. I'll now move on to item 6, which is the police performance report for Stirling area. Jill.
Good morning all. If it's in order, what I'll do is I'll run through the normal overview as I would normally do, and then once I've completed that, I'll just give you an overview of the details from the march at the weekend, and obviously can take any questions post both sections. So moving on to the report in hand, the report covering the 1st of April 21 to the 31st of October 21 in terms of the statistics provided. The qualitative data within covers that since the last report, which is September and October of 21. So in the period, total crimes in the area have reduced by 15% on last year, which is a reduction of just over 13% on the 5-year average. Crimes of violence, although they have reduced on last year, do show a rise against the 5-year average. And the main reasons for that pertain to common assault and extortion. Now, as we know, and we've discussed at this forum previously, extortion that actually refers in the main to online criminality. So although it does come under the violent crime, in the cases we've been looking here, it does relate to online sort of sexploitation offences. We continue, or fortunately, we see a reduction in assaults on emergency workers on the last year, and work is ongoing within the organisation around about your safety matters, which is essentially allowing us to examine the causes and the trends around about assaults on emergency workers across the blue light services. Serious assault has also reduced by just under 24% on the 5-year average. Within Group 2 crime, that shows a 7% increase on the 5-year average, but does show a reduction of just under 11% on the 5-year average in relation to crimes of rape and attempted rape. Group 3, acquisitive crime continues to show a downward trend, with overall crimes of dishonesty falling by 26% on the 5-year average, and housebreakings falling by a significant 63%. Nationally and locally, again, as we've discussed previously, fraud remains a particular area of focus and still shows increases. In relation to drug-related death, I'm pleased to confirm that Stirling continues to show a reduction, and we are 53% down on the 2020 figures when compared to 2021, so a positive picture there. Group 4 crime shows an increase on last year, although does remain, in fact, similar to the 5-year average. Within that, culpable and reckless crimes continue to show an increase against both last year and the 5-year average. And again, as we've discussed previously, the Operation Tala, the COVID breaches around about the beginning of the reporting period account for quite a number of those crimes, and youth disorder also falling within that category. Hate crimes also show as increasing against last year and the 5-year average, and the main elements of these relate to neighbours disputes, crimes against police officers during the execution of their duties, and some youth offending. And in particular, in relation to that youth offending piece, there's some work going on within schools around about hate crime, language, and the impact of those types of crimes on the wider society. Crimes of disorder and antisocial behaviour are down 27% on last year. And just a couple of points of other business which don't feature within the document. Obviously, since we've last met, we have delivered Operation Urim. That was the COP26 event, which I'm delighted to report that for Stirling had really fairly limited impact. So passed without incident, certainly from a local perspective, which we were delighted to see. A kind of, not so much an update, but really just to revisit the discussion last time around about drink spiking. I know we discussed last time that had appeared to be a trend at that time. Again, I'm pleased to report that we haven't seen any further reports of that over the sort of festive period since we've last met, and indeed a couple of those reports have subsequently been withdrawn by the complainers following some inquiry. In relation to the ones that do remain with us, the toxicology results will obviously allow us to progress those appropriately as we move forward. So at that point, I would pause and move on to the details of the March, if that's in order, Councillor Farmer. Yeah.
That would be great, yes, thanks.
So just to give a sort of overview of the way that played out for anyone who's not been involved in some of the correspondence that we've had over the last few days. Police Scotland became aware of the plans for a group of anti-vaccination protesters to hold a static protest within Kings Park in Stirling. That became aware to us through intelligence sources, and at no point throughout this entire situation have we had contact from anybody pertaining to be the organiser or the planner of this event. It then became clear as we monitored that intelligence that there was indeed an intention to move from the Kings Park and to undertake a march. Again, because we had no formal contact, there was no confirmation of what that route would be or what the planned march would consist of in terms of time or length or what have you. So we engaged our protest liaison officers. This is a group of officers who would normally make that contact with organisers and people who would normally make approaches to the council for permissions, etc. So they tried to engage with the group via various means. In the main, because the legislation around about preventing marches and unauthorised marches requires any warnings or kind of engagement around about the consequences of unauthorised marches to be delivered to an organiser, a named individual, which, as I say, we haven't had in relation to this protest. So the crowd that gathered, probably somewhere in the region of 250 to 300 people, difficult to be exact, did indeed begin their unauthorised procession, and that was, given the numbers involved, and in line with what's the previous marches of this sort, the decision was made that would be managed and facilitated really because that was the best way to ensure both public safety to the people involved in the march, and the wider community. And I would stress that that march, the people involved in that included families, young children, so it was a peaceful crowd, and as I say, we weren't unduly concerned about the people within that number. So the senior officer on duty at the time risk assessed that and made the decision that the safest option was to facilitate that march. Again, even on beginning that, we still had no confirmation of the route, so it was very much a fluid decision with roads being closed as we moved forward with the group. We did have a deployment of police officers with the group throughout, so they facilitated the road closures to make sure that the group was kept safe in order to kind of minimise disruption around about traffic and other people going about their business. The warnings about the unauthorised march were delivered to the group. As I say, the legislation really called for them to be delivered to an individual, but we did continue to give that message to all of those involved at the time. I guess some of the feedback has been that people within the town centre were concerned about the march, etc. And yes, I appreciate that the number would have potentially looked quite big, and particularly once you get into the limited space within Port Street in the city centre. However, there was no disorder, there was no arrests made, and up to this point in time, I'm unaware of any criminality being reported. There's been no crimes noted in relation to anybody involved in the march. We had pre-engaged with the city centre, the Thistle Centre, and some of the shops there, because we figured that was the most likely place they would head for, so that they were aware that this was potentially coming in the direction of the town centre. So we had given some prior warning of our thoughts on that. Obviously, the decisions made on the day, a balance between giving people the right to protest lawfully and peacefully and the wider public safety piece. So obviously the dynamic risk assessments made on the day were designed to facilitate both of those aspects. The march thereafter pretty quickly dispersed, and as I say, no significant issues from our perspective. Happy to take any questions on both that and the report at this point.
Thanks very much for that comprehensive report on the main body of the report, and it's certainly very heartening to see that the significant reduction in drug-related deaths is certainly to be welcomed, and I think that's also due to the proactive partnership working that we've been doing with our partner agencies to try and minimise these very tragic and sad events. So well done to everyone involved with regard to that. I'll now pass on for questions and comment. I'll just look at the order and I've got Alistair Tollemache first, followed by Jane.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener, and thank you, Jill. I first want to say before I ask the question, the police do a very good job, and I'm very supportive of the police. So what I might say, I just want to put that into the context. The question that I really have is, I understand the law, and I understand that you need a named the person to speak to. But doesn't this set a precedent? Because for those people who potentially don't want to come under the legislation or want to go outside it, could say, we're not going to contact the police, we're not going to contact the council, we'll just actually, they'll just go on the day. And I'm sure you would agree, Jill, that we need to make sure that we treat everybody the same. So potentially, if there was an unauthorized march, but this wasn't regarded as a march, but it turned into a march, can you assure the public that everybody will be treated in exactly the same way? Because I think there is a concern, and the concern is over you're treating one particular group in a different way that you might treat another group. So that's the question that people have come to me with, so it was only right to come to you, Jill.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's reasonably straightforward. There is no precedent around about that. That has been a tried and tested tactic that I was reflecting the other day that back in my early service about 25 years ago in Edinburgh, I know it's hard to believe, but the James Connolly March was forbidden from marching through the city centre, and yet they did, and we facilitated that march because in terms of public safety, it was absolutely the right and safest thing to do. So this is in no way a new situation. The legislation may have changed around about it, but the decision to either try and prevent a march or facilitate a march will always be made on the grounds of public safety. And in this case, the decision to allow a peaceful march, albeit unauthorised, to take place was absolutely the right thing to do, rather than trying to prevent and disperse upwards of 250 people, which could potentially have led us into a more challenging public order situation. So certainly no precedent set around about allowing this march to take place, or allowing is maybe the wrong word, but facilitating this march, you know, as I say, I'm really content that no precedent, and again, everyone would be looked at on its own merits. Super, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's probably just to reinforce that message, and I guess the fear that's been articulated there, the reality is for the majority, people do follow the requirements in order to carry out a protest, parade, procession or whatever. The vast majority of people do comply, and unfortunately the measures that the public think might help things, as Jill's alluded to there, unfortunately experience shows they do tend to escalate things, which then can lead to disorder and challenge and risk to the wider public, which hopefully events of Saturday have managed to negate. So it's not to say things were ideal, but taking everything into the round, in the vast majority of cases, people do follow the rules that apply to processions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm sure you've seen the local press, and if you read the local press, that's almost a different version of what happened. So isn't it important, okay, Chair, that from this committee we support the police in this to say what happened, because I think there are other suggestions that what you've described, okay, Jill, that it wasn't a peaceful thing. But thank you for reassuring me. Thank you.
Sure. Right.
Sorry, what we should say is if there are points that people have a complaint in relation to what took place or have been the victim of something during events of Saturday, then absolutely encourage anyone to come forward and share that with ourselves, and naturally we'll review that in terms of any criminality and take appropriate action.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Jill, for your report. I'd just like to say I am very supportive of the police, but I have a few questions about Saturday, because like Alistair, I've had some questions from residents. I'm just wondering if in your experience, if static protests usually stay static, because protests in their nature don't seem to be particularly static events to me. I know you had no confirmation of the route or the event officially, but most people who visit Stirling on a Saturday will go to the Thistle Centre. That's where the crowds are. That's where they're going to be seen. Would it not have been reasonable to have expected the marchers to end up there and to have maybe had a few officers just standing at the two or the few entrances to the Thistle Centre? I mean, I understand absolutely what you're saying about not wishing to escalate, but I just thought that would have been a reasonable step to take, given that that's where most of the people are and that would be where the marchers would get attention.
So to your first point about static protests, I think what we've seen in Stirling over recent years is actually they do, because people like the ability to have Kings Park and they set up speakers and what have you, and we've seen the same in things like at Bannockburn and things. So in actual fact, the vast majority of those that do make approaches about static demonstrations tend to keep to that, and that would be our experience locally, certainly. And in terms of the Thistle Centre, we did speak with them in advance, and we did have officers accompany that march, the decision was made that it was more appropriate to keep people safe on the roads and going from Kings Park into the town than it was to remove officers from that to stand outside the Thistle Centre. Ultimately, the Thistle Centre could have closed the doors into the precinct if they felt that was most appropriate. So for me, and again, I wasn't there on the day, but my understanding was the decision was made that it was safer to have the officers flanking the people walking to try and keep a measure of control over the roadways and what have you than it was to take a number of those officers away to stand outside the shop. So as I say, that was a decision that was made by the senior officer on the ground on the day, and it's one I can certainly understand.
Fair enough, I understand that too. Thanks.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Oxborough.
Thanks, Chair. Jill, I completely understand the logic behind them. Once the march is kicked off, the safest thing to do is to let it run its course rather than try and intervene and stop it. I totally get that. What that means in practice, though, is that while as you say, the vast majority of people that take part in a protest will follow the regulations and submit all the relevant paperwork, what it means in practice is for the people that take part in marches and don't play by the rules, there's no consequence at all. So in a sense, it makes the rules, it makes them functionally irrelevant. So the question I've got is, as a next step, is there a follow-up by yourselves or any other bodies to sort of identify the people who took part in what was in effect an illegal march and to take any type of action against them?
So there's a couple of points I would make. I think in essence, the first part, if people who come along to that march and don't behave in a peaceful and appropriate manner, regardless of whether the march is authorised or not, they are still subject to all the other laws around about criminality as everyone else. So if they commit a breach of the peace or they become involved in any other form of criminality, then they'll be dealt with for that. So there absolutely is consequences to the behaviour once that march is either staying in Kings Park or moving off. So I'm content that whilst the legislation around about applying for the permission to march is one very small part of it, the bigger concern for me would be about having 250 people going through the streets of Stirling, creating disorder and smashing windows or whatever it might be. That would be a bigger concern to me, and those individuals would be dealt with for that. In terms of follow-up, so the suggestion is that there may well be other intelligence around about these people. So that doesn't stop just because they've completed their time in Stirling. So we will still be monitoring the intelligence feeds and obviously sharing that with other cities around the area, because I think this group have already sort of said that this will be continuing on in other towns and cities. So absolutely, as and when that happens and the intelligence picture continues to be gathered nationally, then we have the opportunity to revisit that should that become possible for us.
Okay.
Makes sense. Thank you. And one more question, Chair. Similar to that one in terms of follow-up. I appreciate that you said that your officers didn't witness any significant disruption on the day. The feedback I've had from members of the public who were in the Thistle Centre and the press reports do differ from that quite significantly. I wasn't there myself. It's one word against the other. But it seems to me that if people were acting in an aggressive and hostile and threatening way in the Thistle Centre, then I think that there should be some type of legal recourse there. So the question is, are you and your team going to attempt to make use of the CCTV in the Thistle Centre, which I'm assuming will be quite extensive, to review that just to identify if there were in fact any crimes committed, and if necessary, tracking down those people and arresting them?
Yeah, absolutely. As the Super says, more than happy to pursue anybody who's been involved in criminality, whether it be within the Thistle Centre or at any other part of that march. I understand I think the Thistle Centre team were having a meeting yesterday, which we've been engaged with through the community policing team. So anything that comes our way that provides, evidence or a suggestion that there was any criminality,
Okay, I think there's been a connection issue with
Yeah,
Jill there.
Jill's frozen there. So clearly what she was about to say is whatever comes to ourselves in terms of evidence of criminality, then we'll be more than happy to pursue. And as I say, if individuals have engaged with yourselves personally and indicated behaviour which is been threatening or reaches a breach of the peace or whatever, then please do direct them our way and we're more than happy to investigate.
Yeah, and I think that's a message going out to the committee. If there's any members of the public that experienced any threatening behaviour, then we would urge them to report that to Police Scotland to take that matter forward. Thanks for that. Okay, Councillor MacDonald and then Councillor Kane. Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener, and thank you for your comments about urgent business. I just would like to ask some separate questions about the body of the report after my questions about the March, if that's possible.
Yep.
I just want to, well, I thank the police for what they were trying to do at the weekend, and I appreciate it was very, it's a very tricky situation. And I realise across the UK, marches and people gluing themselves to roads and all sorts of protests over the last couple of years. We've had a lot to protest about. Has been extremely difficult to judge exactly what you do. And I do wonder how many officers you had to deal with quite a blob of people. And if that was part of the issue, and if in the future you would be interested in, you might do different things with the Thistle marches, close it down or put more officers there. Is there something that you've learned from it that you would change? And how many officers do you need to police such a complicated blob of people?
So an interesting question. I guess somewhat ironically, had the march had an approved route and we'd had the support of council colleagues for road closures and what have you, it probably would have had significantly less officers deployed to it than it did on Saturday. So the number of officers we had at that, including the protest liaison team, was probably greater than it would normally have been, just because of the unknown nature of what was about to unfold. So as I've discussed before, any area commander that sits at Public Safety Committee and tells you they couldn't use more officers is probably not telling the truth. We will always take more officers if they become available. But as I say, the deployed number there was greater than it probably would have been, just because of the unknown nature of that. So I'm content that on the basis of what we knew, and we you know, as Councillor Roxburgh and Hutchison have said, you know, the best guess about what might have happened, coupled with the intelligence, we probably had, you know, about the right number on the day.
Just to close off the point about, do you think you'd do something different with the Thistle marches in the future if a similar protest about something else popped up?
Again, we had given them the sort of heads up that this is what we were kind of, you know, as Councillor Hutchison said, that there was every chance that either Bannockburn or the town centre would have been the two areas, or the castle potentially. So in terms of covering off those, you know, we had been in touch with them and made them aware. You know, would we have put more officers? Again, my sense on the day is that it was safer to have the officers with the crowd, because if they had turned up the hill to the castle and we've got 4 cops standing in the Thistle Centre, you know, that doesn't make an awful lot of sense. So I think in terms of a fluid, dynamic, changing situation, the best and the right decision was to have the officers remain with the crowd. Had obviously things become more challenging within the Thistle Centre than we did, then we would have peeled off, you know, more officers to deal with that. But as we've said, in terms of what's been reported to us at this point in time, you know, there was nothing being flagged up as being of particular concern at that time. So again, I think easy in hindsight, I guess, but you know, content that the decisions made on the day were probably the right ones.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess the piece is, for any future incidents, we did engage in advance on this occasion, and we would do likewise going forward, and collectively understand what anyone who might be impacted might be planning to do to complement whatever activity our force would look at as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kane.
Thanks, Councillor Farmer. Yeah, I suppose just as we're commenting on the march, do you know, I disagree with what the march was about, but I completely agree with the right to protest. and I'm struggling a little bit with trying to bring the two things together. In that, you know, Councillor Oxford, I note you're quoted in the press as saying that lessons must be learned by the police so this does not happen again. I'm not really sure what the lesson is that can be learned that won't let this happen again, because I think the police probably did an excellent job on Saturday because they used their common sense, they used their training and their professionalism to make sure that this didn't get worse. We've all seen pictures in the 80s at miners' strikes when the police are sitting there with their batons and charging on horses. None of us want to go back to that. That was a horrendous time of relationships between communities and police. And I think if we reflect on the relationship the police and the communities have today, it's incredibly strong. It's a collective approach to solving problems. And I'm very proud of the relationship that we have with the police. Do the police get it right in everything? Absolutely not. Do communities get it right in everything? Absolutely not. But when I think of some of these pictures that we saw in the Daily Record in 1984, I ain't supporting anything that looks like we're heading back in that general direction. So, Jill, can I say it's not only do I support the police, as others have said, I think you did a very good job on Saturday under very difficult circumstances. I think the legislation is problematic because, as has been pointed out by others, it relies heavily on one person saying, I think I'd like to organise a march. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go fill in a form on the council's website and see if I can get permission. Then they get hit with, well, you better pay for 3 ambulances, you better pay for road closures, and you better put a contribution to police. And that protest against something, which in this instance I disagree with, that protest could be something that I'd like to march with in the future. It could be a totally different subject that I do agree with, but I can't march because I've suddenly been landed with an £8,000 bill to express a democratic principle. So I think let's get this into context. The story in the Stirling Observer is a difficult one because people on both sides of the debate have a point. I agree with the people who are saying it shouldn't have happened, but or it shouldn't have. I don't agree with what the protesters were protesting for, but I do very much agree with what they were, you know, the fact that they should be allowed to protest. So that's more of a rambling comment, Jill, but thank you for doing that with a bit of common sense at the weekend. I do agree with Councillor Oxford that we should be looking at CCTV and we should be seeing what could happen, because whilst the march may have been peaceful, there were certainly marchers who were not peaceful, and they're the ones that we have to deal with. But in the context of the detection rate in other crimes, how much of your effort are you putting into solving this one through trawling through CCTV when we've still got, you know, detection rates that are low on other more serious crimes? So well done on a very difficult decision, a very difficult situation. I agree with Councillor Oxford that we do have to see what we can do to tidy up some of the more difficult bits, but I don't agree with Councillor Oxford when he's saying things like lessons must be learned by the police so this does not happen again. If it happens again, from my point of view, do the same thing, because we all got home safely on Saturday night, and if you go back 30 years ago, that wasn't always the case at protest marches.
Yep. I think Councillor Kane, lessons are always learned in terms of these marches, and as was alluded by CI Marshall, that this is an ongoing situation, and intelligence will be shared in terms of this group as it goes forward, and appropriate action will then, and proportionate action will be taken based on that intelligence. Councillor Oxford.
Thanks, Chair. Just to respond quickly to Councillor Kane's comments there, you know, I'm completely satisfied with the responses that the police have given me this morning. I don't think there was anything unreasonable about what I said, Chris. I don't think there's anything unreasonable about wanting to live in a country where people can't get away with committing a crime just because enough of them happen to attempt it at the same time. And the reports coming through were that some very, very ugly things happened in the Thistle Centre on Saturday. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that I don't want that to happen again.
Right. I'm not having this into...
I'm not going to come back. It's a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Jill, what was the criminal? You mentioned earlier on in a response to this, there was no criminality on the march itself. Was the march itself illegal? Or was it? Where is the criminality? But you know, I actually agree with Councillor Oxford's points that some marchers require to be dealt with, and I absolutely agree with his point that we should be able to live in a country peacefully. But I absolutely disagree that we should be limiting the right to march peacefully if it's possible. So what was the crime here?
I think, Chris, it's the issue is the difference between a criminal act and an unlawful act. But right, anyway, Jill, if you.
Yeah, so
that's what I'm seeking the clarity on, Scott.
Yeah.
So I guess the march itself was unauthorised, and as I say, the legal ability would be around about the organiser. So the people taking part in the march, to the best of my knowledge, are not committing a criminal act by being part of it. However, as we've discussed, if somebody then goes into the Thistle Centre and commits an assault, a Section 38, a breach of the peace, whatever it might be, then that in itself, obviously, regardless of whether that's as a result of the march or why they're there, that is a standalone separate crime. And obviously we when we write the description of the events for going forward to the Procurator Fiscal, we would explain that it's been as part of that wider group. But the actual individual acts of criminality, we would deal with them as we would do any other day of the week. So if that comes to light that there has been acts of any criminality within the Thistle Centre or elsewhere that anyone wants to report, and again I would say at this point in time I have had no complaints from individuals reporting that at the moment, and I suppose there is a difference between that and people saying that they felt threatened in general by the presence of the group. I guess that's a different thing, and it's slightly more challenging to unpick than individuals who've chosen to act in a threatening and aggressive manner within the Thistle Centre or elsewhere. But again, we'll unpick those as they come to us.
But just to be clear, in my own mind, there may have been a crime committed by somebody behind a Wizard of Oz-like curtain somewhere who was the organiser that we've not been able to identify. But the people who were on the march were not in themselves committing a crime, and they were, and the way you were policing that, even if they're moving from point A to point B, the movement is not a crime, and only the marchers only become criminals, if you like, if they smash a window or something. But going from the King's Park to the town centre in itself is not a crime. There is nothing there that you could have done, and the reason I'm asking for that clarity is because there's an awful lot of emotion going on in the reporting of this. So when we talk about it's shocking and we need to do more, I'm just trying to figure out what is the crime and what isn't. And from what I'm hearing, gathering in the King's Park by a group of 200 people isn't illegal. Marching from the King's Park to the town centre isn't illegal. Up to that point, the only thing that could be illegal is that the organiser, this mysterious fellow, is committing a crime by not having applied for a permit. But the crimes themselves are the actions of the marchers at a later stage. And that is important, because let's not start saying that marches are filled with criminals, because that's getting dangerous.
Yeah, that would certainly be my understanding of the legislation. And again, as long as the actions of the people involved remain peaceful and in line with their human rights to peacefully protest, then for me that's absolutely accurate. Super. I don't know if you would have anything else to add to that, but that's certainly my understanding.
No, I wouldn't have anything else to add to that, Jill.
So in effect, it's not illegal, but it was unlawful in terms of the civil side of the law, because it did not comply with the requirements to apply to the council. In effect, Councillor MacDonald, you're muted, Councillor MacDonald.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to move back to the body of the report, because I think the police have done a lot of other things other than just what happened on Saturday. So I just wanted to ask a few questions about that. Thank them for all the hard work they've done over the year. Two questions I have. I am still interested in resilience plans. And on page 14, we talk about resilience in the community. I just wanted to understand not all the details of Storm Arwen. That's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is how we're going to engage with communities on future resilience plans, not just for Storm Arwen, but a range of different things, something that we need to do coming soon.
Do you want me to take this one?
Yes.
Bill? Well, we've said that we'll not talk about Storm Arwen. It obviously is pretty topical given where we find ourselves in terms of climate, etc. So just to maybe explain process and maybe not fully answer the question, Councillor, but so on the back of Storm Arwen, there was a question from the Deputy First Minister of all who were affected to do a debrief and feedback information. So recommendations from that were shared with all affected local resilience partnership areas yesterday, which have to be ratified and signed off. But from a Forth Valley Resilience Partnership perspective, I'm one of the co-chairs. So I chaired the meeting on Tuesday. All partners who dealt with the fallout of the recent Storm Arwen are going to take part in a formal debrief, which will be facilitated by Gary Gordon from the Resilience Partnership. And any learning from that will be taken forward. Basically, it gets ratified by the co-chairs, any recommendations which come out of the debrief. Understandably, resilience is one of the things that we probably do need to look at in more detail going forward, but as a collective, not simply as a policing. My understanding from the feedback or the initial feedback from Storm Arwen was that the communities did a fantastic job, and there was lots of support out there, and centres were set up pretty quickly at the point we realised that that was all required. So resilience is absolutely something which is hugely topical at the moment, and something which we do need to involve the communities in, but it's something which we can happily come back to and share in terms of the debrief from Storm Arwen if it would be of interest to those on this meeting today, given the impact there was in Stirling.
Thank you for that.
And just a second question, also about engagement, separate type of engagement. I see on page 15 you talk about partnerships and preventions, pension scams and investment scams, and you talk about there was a training scheme for Stirling Council officers, and I think that's fantastic. But what are you doing to try and roll out these sort of schemes to the wider public and engage with the maximum number of people possible? Thank you.
Super. I'm conscious this sits within.
So I'm superintendent for partnerships and prevention. So absolutely, that should be skillfully passed to myself to answer. So at the moment, our crime prevention, our traditional crime prevention officer Brian Mackey, recognising the online challenge that we have round about fraud, and that it's not necessarily targeting the traditionally vulnerable, but the cash-rich vulnerable, etc. Brian did an input to the council, as you've alluded to there, councillor. What he's doing is he is recording the inputs that he's doing. He has reached out to a number of organisations, but again, I would implore anybody that's on the call today, if you have an organisation or group of people who'd be interested in getting advice round about fraud prevention, then give us a shout. There are a number of videos that Brian has done that we could easily share out, given that a lot of our work is being done virtually at the moment. But it's a massive area, and the nature of frauds change as soon as one's a person responsible traced and dealt with, then the nature of the fraud tends to change, and the challenge is not simply a local one, as I'm sure you'll understand. It can be a national frauds that are perpetrated nationally or internationally, which makes it very difficult to understand those who are responsible. I guess the bottom line is, in terms of any clear message that we'd put out, the one thing that we often say is if something sounds too good to be true, it generally is, and that's not a bad rule of thumb to go by. The thought that you can get rich quick or make loads of money with very little effort, sadly, doesn't happen very often. So there are some really easy lines that we can share. But as I say, Brian's just starting to do the kind of retirement packages and advice round about that. But we're happy to share what we've got. And I know that he's shared it with other councils for their information and use as they see appropriate.
Well, I think I just would inquire to the council officers if we can put the links up to these videos and maybe get them out to our public we reach. So thanks for that.
Okay, right. Councillor Kane, then Councillor Tollemache.
I get an offer from an app that I subscribed to on my phone that they offered me a really good discount deal that I thought that's just too good to be true. That's probably so. I went onto the website. I found their customer services email. I contacted them and said, I've got this. This seems like a scam. And they said, no, it's a real promotion. I still don't believe them. So my too good to be true meter is actually probably just firing a little bit too strong at the moment. It's probably interesting for people that are doing promotions to bear that in mind, that there is a limit where it goes over to that. No, on that wider point, it would be useful on threats and extortion, I think, for future reports, and possibly it's one, I realise this is our last meeting of the term, so to speak. It might be useful to actually expand that a little bit, because I recognise that, you know, you've a job and we've a job in community planning and as councillors to try and help, but I must say I just don't understand enough about it, and it's because it's all lumped into one line item. So maybe this report is still very much grounded in an analogue world with the way that it approaches crimes, and we're needing to just do a little bit of work to take the digital side of it and expand it in the way that we look at it in committee, so we can, you know, stop talking about digital crimes and we start breaking them down into individuals. So just a comment for that. And I suppose my general quote, I'll finish as I started in this committee. The community council's bit is still not there. I recognise that because they're meeting remotely, but as we emerge from this pandemic, as we hopefully undoubtedly will, can I get some assurance that that will start to reappear, hopefully at the next committee, and that your commitment to re-engaging with community councils and to continuing to use them as a primary source of intelligence and a key part of your engagement is still as strong, and it's still your intention to do that going forward?
Jill?
Yeah, so we obviously discussed this one at the last meeting. However, the paperwork for this report was completed about a fortnight after the last one. So there's obviously been no time to include that within the reporting period. So from the 1st of January 2022, we will start to record, I'm going to say it as accurately as possible, those meetings which are taking place in the flesh, those which are taking place virtually, and again our engagement with them. So that will appear from the next report for whenever the next meeting is ultimately scheduled for, and Chief Inspector Logan will happily report on that for you. We've also engaged with a number of the community councils over the last few weeks, just in that kind of down period, just to revisit the reports which are provided. So just a bit of a sense of probably just updating those a little bit from very statistical driven information to a bit more qualitative, probably more akin to what you see within the board papers for this committee. So just a bit more about trends and themes, A, that's specific to wards, and B, that's specific to Stirling slightly more widely. So that work is ongoing, so that as we kind of start into this year's cycle of meetings, they should be getting rolled out across the piece. So from me, an assurance that commitment remains. And as Caroline and I do our handover and post, I will definitely sit down with her and just go through the benefits that we get from the community councils and that engagement.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Tolma.
Okay, thank you very much. Jill, the guide campaign, do you have any kind of statistics at all on the number of people that's reached or the people that have responded to that? And is there, the time limit for that? Will it be reintroduced? And a kind of question linked to that, in the community work for the police, what way do you link that campaign with your community work?
So I don't know the specifics of the reach of the That Guy campaign, although I did see an article in which DCC Malcolm Graham was quoted around about the success of that campaign in general terms across Scotland. So I don't have those figures to hand, but I suspect that it's obviously been well received given his comments. So if that information becomes available, I'll happily share it. And I think for us locally, and I tried to put a little bit of detail in the report just to give some reassurance about how we engage, particularly around about the nighttime economy, which is obviously kind of, I guess, the main thrust of these concerns. And we do that in a number of ways in terms of the kind of Ask Angela piece, the engagement with the street pastors and the safe base and the pub watch. So I think that guy was one part of it. I think, again, I think we discussed at the last meeting that the males as perpetrators for all violence is one aspect, but we need to be alive enough to the fact that that might not always be the case. So it's certainly at the back of our minds, and again, you'll see from the group 2 crime, and I guess if we take it to the nth degree, the concerns about violence against women, potentially end up in the reporting of a group 2 crime, whether that be a rape or an indecent assault. And again, the statistical piece in Stirling would suggest that we're in a downward trajectory there, which I take as a positive in terms of not only the messaging and the campaigns that are running, but about the kind of proactive nature of the community policing and the weekend policing plan specifically, and notwithstanding all the work we do around about the university, acknowledging that there's a potential vulnerability around about that cohort of individuals. So I think we're aware of our risk demographic and the profile within Stirling, and we probably target that pretty effectively, or certainly have done up until now. Obviously, we have the potential, for nightclubs reopening and a kind of return to the full nighttime economy over the next week or so. So again, that will in itself present some new challenges. But I think we're in a good place in terms of not only our response, but the partnership response. And I think we have to acknowledge that our partners play a huge part in that as well.
Mandy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just to follow on from that point that Jill's making about the partners. So I guess That Guy campaign, the main thrust of it, was just to make people think about the interpretation of what's being said and what's actually meant. They can be two different things sometimes, depending on the motivation. So I've started having meetings with colleagues in education across all 3 local authority areas just round about that behaviours piece, because obviously behaviours at a young age, when unchecked or unchallenged, can then sadly lead to more serious offences in later life. So I'm in discussions just now. There are questionnaires ongoing round about wellbeing for young people, and we're going to look at the responses from that to get a sense of behaviours for our young people and make sure that the interventions which are already taking place within education, I think there's maybe a sense, and I wouldn't talk for partners, but there's maybe a sense that there's a thought around lowering the age at which some considerations of inputs are given, just to make sure we're capturing that young piece, to do that early intervention, which we all know is really, really important. So just to kind of tidy that piece up about the prevention side of things as well.
That's reassuring. Councillor Brisley.
Yes, thank you. Could I just ask about Operation Complement, the 4 days of action in the eastern villages? I'm really interested to read this, and not for just now, but I'd be grateful for if there was some further information, because I'm sure this was welcomed by the community. And I'm interested in the number of people who officers engaged with, the number of motorists spoken to, and really the reactions when people were being spoken to. And also the school-based officers go to primary schools, because that's always a real issue at the schools. So I'd be really interested if somebody could get back to me, just to give me a wee bit more information.
Yeah, no, I'll absolutely get our community sergeant to come back to you on that one. I would say that, Operation Complement is just the latest iteration. We've had Imagine, Curb, Will, I'm just looking at my list here. And the Royals, which was probably the very first one I did when I came into post here, which was again taking the concerns of those communities, whether it be about drugs or antisocial behaviour or what have you, and then delivering that very overt response in terms of yellow jackets, school-based officers, road policing officers. So we've done that numerous times over the last few years, and this was just the latest one. And again, always happy to deliver something like that if we feel there's a need in a particular location. But I'll arrange for some further information to come back to you directly, Councillor. But as I say, the delivery of these operations is really flexible, and we can kind of deliver that where the need is at any given time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison.
Thanks, Chair. Jill, I was just wondering, with the lambing about to start in many of our rural communities, if PC Campbell and other people involved with the rural crime would be going out again to really emphasise to people the importance of keeping dogs under control around pregnant sheep and sheep with lambs at foot.
Yeah, I think that's actually ongoing at the moment, and I was speaking to Inspector Bushell before this meeting, and he was just away up to speak with the wider partnership just around about the kind of deployment of that. So absolutely in hand and ongoing, and it's a real keen focus for PC Campbell at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, well, thanks for that. I think we've considered the contents of this report and we've given it a good thorough going over, so that's great. So we're happy to note the police report, and if we move on to item 6, which is the fire and rescue 6 monthly performance report.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Just to hopefully you've all been able to see the 6 monthly performance report running from April 2021 to 30th September 2021. I'm not planning to go through the whole report itself. I'll just put out some key areas which I'll report on to yourselves, and happy to take any questions following the dialogue I've given. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about accidental dwelling fires. So there's 36 incidents for that period of time. This has increased 4 against our target. Looking at the accidental fires, looking at statistics, etc. So with more people working from home, raises the chance of an accidental dwelling fire, as well as looking at the incidents we attended. This was very much around what we class as unsafe cooking practices. So leaving pots on the stove, etc., setting off the alarms and the fire service turning up. And where appropriate within that, we make our referrals to our partners. Depending on when we turn up and the crews turn up, they do that assessment on it. We make a referral through to our partners for support if they're needed. Looking as well at the deliberate primary fires. So the 21 deliberate primary fires within the area, that's an increase of 5 against our target. There's 12 deliberate fires involving grassland and woodland, and 3 deliberate fires involving motor vehicles. So the 12 deliberate fires involving grassland and woodland, so that's to do with the landowner's property where there's some value in the woods, etc., etc. within that. So we have our community action team have linked in with landowners and had discussions around them, around making the areas safe, making sure fences are still up in place, etc. But also the community action team linking in with where we could do if the schools are open to engaging with the children, etc., and people out there. We have done, and the previous meetings we mentioned before, we have done a lot of work around the woodland area, the community action team, and using the Polaris, which is based up at Dunblane, being able to go off-road with the community forestry teams, etc., engaging with the campers, but also could be with them areas. So deliberate secondary fires. So we've had 101 deliberate secondary fires reported for that point of time. That's an increase of 54 against our target, which is quite a significant increase against the target, what we've got there. 23 of them involved grassland and 20 of them involved refuge. So looking at that period of time and going through the COVID aspects and looking at schools are shut, so there's more children, no diversionary tactics happening because of COVID, youth clubs being shut, was allowing to taken away, so children become bored within the area and youths within that. So unfortunately, this increased our secondary fires in the area. We also community action team, which is based out of Alloa, that serves the Stirling area, and other resources in the Stirling Clacton Fire were able to bring them across to the area to support the Stirling and the 7 wards. Is that we're linking closely with our partners around this crime, and there's ongoing. They have, I think it's either a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting they have to do with that. So our community safety advocates have them direct links into that. With relation to UFAS, so that's unwanted fire alarm signals. There's 278 incidents for that 6-month reporting period, which is an increase of 34 against our target. Again, we have our prevention and protection team, so our legislative side, they link in directly with the proprietors of the businesses, and that period of time businesses were opening up again, so there was an increase of the workforce in there. And whether it is accidental or malicious activation of alarms, the alarms have increased, but we work directly closely with our offenders in there, and with the universities, there's been an uprise in the university aspects of the alarms going off. Again, we have a direct link in there. We have what we call a UFAS champion. So the UFAS champion makes that direct link with relative businesses and supports them where needed and gives advice on how they can better to reduce the alarms actuating. So that's the overview of our report, Chair. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alistair. I'll open it up for questions, points of clarification. Councillor MacDonald, followed by Councillor Kane. You're muted, Councillor MacDonald.
Sorry. I'd just like the fire service, Mark, to make some comments on a couple of things. UFAS implementation, how we're doing with retained recruitment, and how you would engage on a resilience plan in the future.
Okay, so hopefully I'll split it into 3 areas. So the first one, recruitment, RDS stations ongoing. We are identifying people. We have a national process which we follow. Some of the communities where it's a small community just come a struggle to recruit, but we are actively recruiting out there. And there are people for most stations going through the process of the recruitment part. The first bit you mentioned, Councillor?
How the UFAS implementation was going, because we were changing the rules, and I just wondered how that was working out for you.
Councillor, if I can just step on that for UFAS. So I sit on the board for the service for the UFAS policy. So the implementation of the new UFAS policy has been delayed for a year until April 2023. And that's been advertised now. We've directly engaged with premises owners that we have engaged with throughout the process. That decision has been taken to enable premises owners and large organisations such as the council to have a look at their risk assessments and ensure that they have appropriate measures in place to deal with that. What I would say changes that have been made since the initial consultation is the maintaining of 2 appliance response to detailed sleeping risks such as hospitals, etc. So we have made a move back towards protecting care homes, hospitals, etc. However, that extended time is to enable premises owners to make any adjustments both within their risk assessments and their actual procedures. You'll probably be aware that the activation of a fire alarm and its investigation is not the responsibility of the fire and rescue service. It is the responsibility of the premises owner. So we've existed in a culture where it's something that the fire service has done with the best will in the world. However, we've had to take action given the amount of unwanted fire alarm signals that are generated. However, so to answer your question, Councillor, hopefully that extension for the year will enable those organisations to put measures in place that will assist them to ensure that they have the correct procedures in place. In terms of the resilience plans, it's the same answer as Superintendent Patterson gave. I sit in the Fife Local Resilience Partnership, so it's the same, very much the same policies and procedures, and we have our own plans in place. We also have our business continuity plans within the service, so each station has a business continuity plan for resilience in case something happens with that station to close it down. We have alternative addresses, etc., to move our resources to ensure that we can still provide that service to the people of Stirlingshire and further. I hope that answers your questions, councillors.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Kane.
Thanks, Councillor Farmer. Yeah, it's just continuing on for the fire alarms thing. Now that you've made a policy decision to sort of change it, I think one of the things Public Safety Committee has to do is change the way that we report. This is a comment, Councillor Farmer. We need to change the way we report on that in it, because what we need to know is how that policy is actually working in the real world. So it's more just to get it minuted, Councillor Farmer, that I think that, you know, going forward, the Public Safety Committee needs to really drill down into how we want to look at that over the next couple of years. And that we really need to know reasonably quickly that the policy is actually working. So I would just put a marker down in a minute that, you know, if we could perhaps just revisit that element of the fire report going forward, just to see if we can perhaps tease out some more information to present in a way that allows us to check that the policy is actually working.
Okay, the point well made. Are there any other questions? No. Are we happy to note the fire report? Okay, well, that concludes the agenda. But before I go, this is the last meeting before the council elections. So I'd just like to thank the clerk, Sheila, all our partners for their diligence in providing us with all the necessary information to provide effective scrutiny over the police and fire services, and to thank members for their insightful questions to ensure that the public can have assurance that we are providing effective scrutiny across our services with relation to our partners. So thank you very much to all concerned, very much appreciated, and I wish you all the best as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.